Good morning, friends. We are going to study ER model in Dbms. An ER model is nothing but an entity relationship model. It describes the structure of the database with the help of a diagram, which is known as entity relationship diagram. That is our ER diagram. An ER model is a design or blueprint of a database that can later be implemented as a database. The main component of ER model are entity set and relationship set. Entity is nothing but a thing in the real world with an independent existence. It is a thing or object. What I say, entity is a thing or object that has its own identity or that can be identified easily. An entity may be an object with physical existence, for example, house, person, or with a conceptual existence, for example, course, job. Here, entity is represented by symbol rectangle. Now, what is entity? Entity are the real world object that exist and can be distinguished from one another. It can be place, organization, things, etc. It can be even a person, event, plant. The important feature of the entity is that it has got attributes. The best example of entity is person entity. It's having attributes like person name, address, contact number, date of birth. Next example here is student. Students having number of attributes like roll number, name of student, address, gender, contact number, etc. Next key concept here is attribute. Attribute are nothing but the properties of the entities. For example, if the client is an entity, then its attributes can be its ID, client ID, name, address. The next one is entity set. When there are a number of same type of entities that share the common properties or attribute, such collection of entities is called as entity set. For example, person, books having same attribute or properties like name of person, address, contact number, age, like that. In simple word, properties, attribute means properties that describe the entities. For example, if I have entity person, the properties will describe the particular entity would be the name, age, address, phone number, etc. These are called as attributes of a person. It is represented by oval symbol. There are various types of attribute: composite attribute, simple attribute, single value attribute, multi-value attribute, derive attribute, etc. Relationship, it can be defined as association among several entities. As I said, relationship tells how one entity is related to the another entity. Relationship can have attribute as well. The set of similar type of relationship is called as set of relationship. In relationship set, the number of entities can be more than 2. The relationship is a natural association that exists between one or more entities. In simple word, relationship is an association among two or more entities. For example, teacher teaches student. Here we have two entities. First one is teacher and second one is student. And teaches is a relationship between these two entities. The relationship connects these two entities. That is teacher student. And student, these two are entities. There are various types of relationship: unary relationship, binary relationship, and ternary relationship. In unary relationship, it exists when there is an association with only one entity. For example, only one entity is related with itself. That is unary relationship. In binary relationship, if it exists when there is an association among two entities. The best example here is publisher publish book. Here two entities that are linked together called as binary relationship. It is also called as degree 2 relationship. Here publisher and book, these are two entities, and publishes is a single relationship. Third one is a ternary relationship. It exists when there is an association among three entities. First entity here is subject, teaches student, and teacher teaches student. Teacher teaches student, that is teacher is a one entity, student is another entity, and third one subject is a third entity with single teaches relationship. It is called as ternary relationship or degree 3 relationship. What is an entity relationship diagram? An ER diagram shows, or the entity relationship diagram, it shows the relationship among entity sets. An entity set is a group of similar entities. What is entity set? It is nothing but a group of similar entities, and these entities can have attributes. In terms of Dbms, an entity is a table or attribute of a table in a database. So by showing relationship among tables and their attributes, ER diagram shows the complete logical structure of a database. Let's have a look at a simple ER diagram to understand this concept. Here sample ER diagram, it shows the two entities. First one is student, second one is college. Students study in college. Here relationship exists, study. Student having three attributes. First student ID, second student name, third one student address. And college entity, it's having two attributes. First one is college ID and college name. Let's take another example. Here is ER diagram for customer and loan. Customer is a one entity and loan is another. Customer having three attributes or properties. First one customer ID, second name and address. And second entity loan, it's having amount, loan ID, customer ID, loan type. These are the attributes, and there exists one relationship that is called as own attribute. For example, customer ID, date, borrow code, loan and date. These are some features of ER diagram or ER model. First one here is ER diagram used for representing ER model. It can be easily converted into the relation. The ER model is used for the purpose of good database design by the database developer. So to use that data model in various applications. Third one, it is inherently an interactive process. Fourth one, it is very simple and easy to understand by various type of user and designer because of specific standard used for the presentation. Again, some listed features are, it is used for, it can be easily converted into relations. Relation is nothing but a table in relational model. ER model is used for the purpose of good database design by the database developer. So to use that data model in various Dbms applications. It is helpful as a problem decomposition tool as it shows the entities and relationship between those entities. It is inherent and iterative process. It is very simple and easy. Various components used in ER model. First one, rectangle, and it represents entity and entity set. Ellipse, it represents attributes. Third one here is diamond, it represents relationship set. These are some listed component of ER model. First, rectangle represent set of entity. Double rectangle represent weak entity set. Oval represent attribute. Double oval represent multi-value attribute. Dotted oval represent Derive Attribute. Diamond represent relationship. Double diamond represent weak entity set. Oval with underline represent primary key attribute. Dotted line represent weak entity attribute. As I said, entity is an object or component of data. An entity is represented by rectangle in ER diagram. There are two types of entity, strong entity and weak entity. Strong entity means the entity set that has a primary key is called as strong entity set. Suppose in my ER diagram, roll number is my primary key. Here the strong entity is ER diagram, that is roll number. Weak entity set, the entity set which does not have sufficient attribute to form a primary key is called as weak entity set. That is remaining attribute, that is phone number, address, is the best example of weak entity set. Attribute: simple attribute, composite attribute, single value, multi-value, derive attribute, null attribute. Let's see all the attributes. All the data relating to an entity is held in its attributes. An attribute is nothing but a property of an entity. An entity is represented by a set of attributes, that is descriptive properties possessed by all members of entity set. Domain is the set of permitted value for each attribute. And as follows: simple attribute. Simple attribute is nothing but it is one that consists of a single atomic value. A simple attribute cannot be subdivided. For example, age, gender, city. These are the best example of simple attribute. Means it is a single atomic value. It cannot be decomposed further. Second one is a composite attribute. It is an attribute that can be further subdivided. In composite attribute, there are generally set of sub-attribute. The best example here is name of a student. Name attribute may have first name, middle name and last name. The name is subdivided into 3 sub-attribute, that is called composite attribute. Next one is single value attribute. It can have only a single value. For example, a person can have only one date of birth or age. But a single value attribute can be simple or composite attribute, that is date of birth is a composite attribute and age is a simple attribute, but both are single multi-value attribute. Means attribute can have multiple values. For example, a person can have multiple phone numbers, multiple degrees, etc. Next one is derive attribute. The value for the derive attribute is computed or determined from the store attribute. For example, date of birth of a person is a store attribute. The value for the attribute age can be calculated by subtracting the date of birth from the current date. In this case, we say that the age is a derived attribute. An attribute that value is derived from a store attribute is called as derived attribute. The best example here is of a person, that is derived from a date of birth. Next one is null attribute. Null value is stored when an entity does not have a value for an attribute. Null can also designate that an attribute is unknown, that is missing or not known. It is called as null attribute. Here null is, for example, student ID, name, age, phone number. Let's take an example of simple table. The person who has landline phone will have for that attribute phone number or landline number, but the person who has no landline phone number, that is it will be the null value in that attribute field. For this particular case, meaning of null means not applicable. Null can also be used when we don't know the value of attribute. For example, we don't know the phone number of particular person. Meaning of null would be the unknown. It can be classified into two cases: when value is exist but it is missing, like for example, age of person is exist but it is missing, that is value would be the missing, that means it is null. When second case is it is not known if the value exists or not. For example, we don't know the student, for example Tom, has phone number or not, that is the value of attribute would be the null. Key attribute. A key attribute can uniquely identify an entity from an entity set. For example, roll number. Roll number here is a key attribute. As shown in given figure, here student is a one entity. It's having 5 attributes. First one is roll number, second one name, address, date of birth and contact number. Here contact number is a key attribute. That means contact number, no, it's wrong. Roll number is a key attribute that can uniquely identify each record of a student. Key attribute here is a roll number that can uniquely identify an entity from an entity set. Second one is a composite attribute. An attribute that is a combination of other attribute is known as composite attribute. Here the example of composite attribute are name, student name. It's having further decomposed into the first name, middle name and last name. It is called as composite attribute. Third one is derive attribute. A derive attribute is one whose dash oval in ER diagram. Here age of a student can be derived from date of birth, which is stored in our database. Date of birth. From date of birth we can calculate the age of particular student, that is called as derive attribute. Age can be derived from date of birth, that is called as derive attribute, and it is represented by dashed oval. Fourth one is multi-value attribute. An attribute that can hold multiple values is known as multi-value attribute. Here contact number is a multi-value attribute and it is represented by double oval in a ER diagram. Student having multiple phone number or contact number, that is called as multi-value attribute. Thank you. This is all about ER diagram.